What's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and I've got your Week 13 tight end start and sit analysis. But let's be real for a second here. The tight end position is the most volatile position in all of football right now, and any given week can be a crapshoot. So hopefully the information I've been providing to you here is good enough to get you through some of these matchups. But honestly, right now, we just got to take the tight ends that we think have the highest upside any given week, because it really doesn't matter what their upside is or what their floor is. It just doesn't work out. We've seen great matchups over the last few weeks produce absolutely no outcome for tight ends. We've seen tight ends that have been super consistent throughout the season all of a sudden fall off a cliff. We've seen tight ends who have come out of nowhere to disappear, to come back again. It's all over the place right now. So we're going to try and find some guys here in Week 13 that can help you get a fantasy win. But first off, let's toss up those accuracy numbers from last week. In my best week at tight end to date, 79% accuracy for tight ends last week. Hits included Evan Ingram, Logan Thomas, TJ Hockenson. Yep, Robert Tonyan was a miss, unfortunately. And, Darren Waller was as well. Both of those guys, Robert Tonyan with guys coming back, he's kind of disappeared over the last couple of weeks. All of a sudden, he's back and he's playing well. Got to look at Darren Waller. Darren Waller was in a smash position. They even had the negative game script, and he still couldn't produce. And that's why this season is so up and down, because you look at that right there and look at Darren Waller, everything lined up for him to be just in an absolute smash position this week, and it didn't happen. It's crazy how volatile this position has been this year. But we got to get into what we think will happen in Week 13, put the past behind us, and let's get ready to talk about some of these other matchups this week. For Cleveland at Tennessee this week, it was good to see Austin Hooper score that touchdown last week, but the targets were still low. I'm still betting on some of that pre-injury volume coming back, though. I mean, in the 3 games prior to Austin Hooper having to have that emergency appendectomy, he had 24 targets in those 3 games. So they were really starting to utilize him a little bit more. Obviously leaves with that injury. Now he's back, and he's been a little bit hit or miss since coming back, but hopefully it's just kind of trying to get him worked back in. One thing is Harrison Bryant. Harrison Bryant being used a little bit more is kind of messing with that right now, but they've obviously lost OBJ. That gives Austin Hooper a chance to really step in. I was concerned about him to begin the season, was not a guy that I would have drafted, and I made that very clear this offseason, but as the season has worn on, there's been some opportunity for volume, so I'm not completely off of the bandwagon that he formed in the middle of the season just yet. We'll wait and see what happens. Overall, a pretty disappointing so far this season, but we'll keep moving forward because he's been getting some of those looks, and hopefully some of that comes back to help all of you down the stretch. The one guy this offseason that I was really high on, Jonnu Smith. I mean, he won some weeks for everybody to begin the season. Looked like he was on the way back, and then all of a sudden kind of disappearing again. Not sure really what happened last week. But Jeff Swaim and Anthony Firkser both got more targets than he did. In fact, Jonnu Smith didn't get 1 target last week, which makes absolute no sense to me. Not really sure what's going on there, but I expect the Tennessee Titans to run the ball a lot this week, just like they did last week. And again, if that happens and Corey Davis and Anthony Brown are getting targets, and they've got all 3 of these tight ends kind of mixing in and out, then Jonnu Smith, he's just not going to be a consistent option for us right now. Even after the super disappointing performance from Darren Waller last week, he's still the tight end 2 on the season. And if you own the tight end 2 on the season, you play the tight end 2 on the season. They're going to move on from that horrible loss to Atlanta last week. And in this matchup against the New York Jets, might be looking to put it on them a little bit. So for me, obviously, Darren Waller is going to be a start this week. For the New York Jets, nobody there that we're considering. Heck, nobody, not even one tight end on that roster got a look last week in the passing game. So there's nobody here that's fantasy viable. For Jacksonville, Tyler Eifert's, he's popped his head up a couple of times this offseason to put together some points, but not a consistent option on this team that we're reliant on. And for Minnesota, last week, Kyle Rudolph was a guy that I moved all the way up to tight end 12, and he had a really good game. Didn't end up scoring, but got a ton of volume. Now, Adam Thielen is definitely back this week that we know. But what's going to happen with Irv Smith Jr.? For me, because Jacksonville has been so bad against tight ends this season, even if Irv Smith Jr. is out and Adam Thielen is back, I'll still roll with Kyle Rudolph one more week. That ceiling is going to be a lot lower, obviously, because you've got Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson who will take up a majority of that volume. But with no Irv Smith Jr. and a really good matchup, I'll go to Kyle Rudolph, who Kirk Cousins has been looking a little bit more towards over the last few weeks. More than likely, he'll be a very low tight end 1, maybe a high tight end 2 for me, but really no higher than that. For Cincinnati and Miami, I mentioned it a little bit over the last week. Drew Sample's the guy I'm eyeing very closely right now. Ended up having 5 targets last week, but this isn't the week to really go back to him. I think with Brandon Allen, we absolutely have an opportunity to potentially go back to Drew Sample at some point this season, but for now, it's just not worth it. Miami is giving up under 10 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so I expect Drew Sample to still kind of be in that area this week, and probably not somebody that we really think a whole lot of upside will come from. So skipping on Drew Sample for one more week, and for Mike Gesicki from Miami, if Ryan Fitzpatrick's the quarterback, we're absolutely starting Mike Gesicki. 5 targets and the touchdown last week. Ryan Fitzpatrick is much better for him. Ryan Fitzpatrick allows him to really produce some of that upside we see with big plays. So hopefully he'll have Ryan Fitzpatrick again this week, and if he does, he'll be a start again. If Indianapolis was one big tight end, then we would start Indianapolis every single week. And heck, Indianapolis might be the tight end 3 on the season if they were one big tight end. And trust me, I know something about big tight ends. This is not a great situation for fantasy owners because each one of these guys has had fantasy value at some point this season. And now that all 3 are healthy, all 3 are on the field, all 3 are basically, breaking snaps down the middle, there's just no fantasy relevance here. The hope is any given week, one might score a touchdown. Trey Burton is the one that is the closest to being fantasy relevant, but he is risky because Jack Doyle's getting snaps. Mo Alley Cox is getting snaps. Those are guys that are getting some targets in the passing game as well. Now, Jack Doyle didn't do anything last week, but the week before he scored a touchdown. They are dumping off to running backs and tight ends a lot right now, but unfortunately, because they have 3 tight ends that they use, none of them have any upside. For the Houston Texans, Darren Fells will be a sit for me. I'm going to go back to Jordan Akins, and there's just something about the way that they play him in the slot that appeals to me this week in this matchup. We know that Will Fuller is going to be gone. Kiki QT, a guy that would normally sit out in the slot, is going to probably have to move outside for some plays this week. That is going to allow Jordan Akins an opportunity to really step up because of that slot percentage. It's over 60%. He's in the top 7 tight ends for most snaps in the slot this season, or highest slot percentage this season. So for Jordan Akins, I definitely think there is an opportunity there this week, and I really want to see that come through. He's had some really good opportunities. I mean, heck, he had a good opportunity against Detroit, just didn't come through with it, but of course that's because so much of the volume went to Fuller and went to Cooks. But with no Fuller now, there's going to be an increased volume opportunity for him that we need to keep an eye on. You know what makes Green Bay such a great franchise is when they have players in certain positions, they know how to utilize them. And we saw that last week. Green Bay playing Chicago. They know that is a difficult matchup on the outside for the wide receivers. You obviously have Devontae Parker that you're going to go full bore with. But you know who then you target at that point? You target your tight end. You put him in situations to win. They ran him up the seam. They put him in the middle of the field. It was just perfection how they used Robert Tonyan last week. And I was wrong on Robert Tonyan. But hopefully Detroit can mirror some of that success against Chicago this week when they play them. TJ Hawkinson is up to tight end 3 now, and we'll see if they truly unleash him. Matt Patricia being gone is the best thing that could happen for this team. Hopefully Darrell Bevell might get a little bit more creative with the offense now. So part of me feels like maybe Matt Patricia was kind of holding back some of this game plan. I'm hoping this thing gets just wide open at this point, and TJ Hawkinson just sees a ton of volume. And of course, if Kenny Golladay is out again, that right there is going to lead to more volume within itself. For Chicago, Jimmy Graham is going to go ahead and be a sit for me. He's only had 1 touchdown since week 5, and that's kind of where his upside laid, was in those touchdowns. Now, you can try to throw him out there against Detroit, but they're going to be down potentially Jeff Okudah, which makes the wide receiver upside more interesting this week. David Montgomery looked really good this week. They might be able to run a little bit against Detroit as well, and because of that, Jimmy Graham's just not appealing this week and not a risk that I'm willing to take. Jared Cook just isn't a start with Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill can't get the ball to Alvin Kamara. He can barely get the ball to Michael Thomas. He can't get the ball to any other wide receivers. So if Taysom Hill can't do that, he's not going to get the ball to Jared Cook, which is just the way this offense has gone is just, yeah, it's bad for fantasy owners. And yeah, New Orleans is winning, but it's not very productive, and it's hard to put Jared Cook out there knowing that Taysom Hill is only going to look his way maybe 2 times a game. For Atlanta and Hayden Hurst, though, if you take away Week 11, so Week 11 for Hayden Hurst was really, really bad. But if you take away Week 11, he has averaged 7.5 targets, 5.5 receptions, and 58 yards over the last 4 weeks, over the last 4 games. So he is a guy that, yeah, is absolutely putting up some decent numbers. And he has really 1 bad week in there that kind of skews it a little bit because it was 2 targets, no receptions, no yards. But going up against New Orleans with Julio Jones potentially still being out, we'll look towards Hayden Hurst again because New Orleans has had issues stopping wide receivers. The definition of why the tight end position has just been so awful this season is Evan Ingram. Because, I mean, he was like, okay, beginning of the season, this is looking good. Disappears. All of a sudden, he's back again. People don't want to trust him, though. I mean, he's averaged 9.5 targets a game since week 7 if you take out that week 10 performance. So since week 7, he's getting a ton of targets. I mean, he's got 4 games where he's got at least 9 targets. 2 of those games, he had 10 targets. So he's getting looks now all of a sudden. Finally, New York has just figured out a way to get Evan Ingram looks, which is great. That's awesome. That's why he's going to be a start going up against Seattle. You got to put him out there. If he's getting looks, we got to go back to him. And I know for some of you that's too risky and you just don't like it, but the upside is too good and the volume has been too good to just look away from it this week. On the other side, for Will Dissly and Jacob Hollister, for them, I was really banking on Will Dissly against Philadelphia last week. Really loved that matchup for him. I mean, over on DraftKings, I put a decent bet down on over 2.5 receptions. Didn't even get that. So for right now, still going to list these 2 tight ends as a sit. Part of the reason last week was, DK Metcalf. I mean, the obvious volume that went towards him takes away from the tight ends, and it just doesn't look like the tight ends will really be utilized. It could be an option as we get further, a little bit closer to the season ending, but for right now, we're not going with Will Dissly. Hey, another dumpster fire at the tight end position with the LA Rams. I mean, people love Tyler Higbee coming into this season. Another tight end that I was really cautious about and told people to stay away from. And he hasn't done anything. So for Tyler Higbee, over 50 yards, 2 of the last 6 weeks. That's all he's done. Over 50 yards in 2 games in the last 6 weeks. That's not a tight end that you start. Gerald Everett only has 30 yards once since week 6. I still see people trying to go back to Tyler Higbee, and right now, yeah, he might have a game where he hits every once in a while, but he's just not a guy that you start. I mean, if you have to try and stream him at some point, good luck. That's all I can tell you about Tyler Higbee. You might hit, but chances are you won't. I will say this, though. Tyler Higbee, a lot better play than Dan Arnold, because Dan Arnold still isn't a thing. Similar to the New York Jets, the New England Patriots also didn't target their tight ends in Week 12, and they really haven't been targets all season long, and they're definitely not a target of ours here at the Fantasy Headliners. But who is a target of ours? Mr. Hunter Henry, who continues his hot streak, bringing it into Week 13. Another great week last week. 10 targets, 7 receptions, 63 yards over the last 3 weeks. He is the tight end 3. The dude's been playing a lot better. He's been getting a lot more targets. And thank God for Justin Herbert. One of the lone bright spots last week for the Philadelphia Eagles was Dallas Goedert. Once again, scoring a touchdown against Seattle. It was nice to see that from him. But Zach Ertz is going to be back soon. It may end up being this week. I've got him listed as a sit right now, but we're really going to have to keep an eye on that throughout the week. For right now, Dallas Goedert will be a start for me. Hopefully, if Zach Ertz doesn't play, Dallas Goedert kind of continues this stretch. If Jalen Hurts were to come in for any reason, maybe, he looks to the tight ends a little bit more. But Dallas Goedert's been pretty good over the last couple of weeks, finally kind of getting back into the swing of things after that injury. So we're going to put him back out there, even if he'll be a little bit lower in our rankings. For Green Bay, we got to go back to Robert Tonyan again, and I feel like I'm going to get burnt here. Listed him as a sit last week, said we were probably going to move on from him. Obviously, MVS didn't end up playing last week. Allen Lazard was back, though, but Robert Tonyan, again, I mentioned it when I talked about Detroit. Green Bay knows how to put players in positions to succeed, and that's what they did last week. Knowing that it was going to be tougher on the outside, they got Robert Tonyan over the middle of the field, down the seam in areas that he could win and get some decent receptions in open territory. So Philadelphia has been bad against tight ends so far this season. Let's hope that Rodgers keeps looking Tonyan's way, and if he does, we could have another fantasy viable week from him. For Denver and Kansas City, kind of the same thing that I talked about with the Denver wide receivers in my wide receiver show. What? You can't do anything with Noah Fant right now. You want to start him, but until we know what's going down with the quarterbacks, you can't. Because again, based on some of the issues from last week, because they violated some different protocols, there's been talk of suspensions, there's been talk of fines. We don't know what's going to happen yet. And until we do, we can't start Fant or any of the wide receivers. On the flip side, though, when you play Kansas City, you start Travis Kelce, because if you don't, you're an idiot. For Buffalo and San Francisco, there's just not any viable tight ends in this matchup for me this week. Would like to go Jordan Reed's way. However, if you've got Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk back, which Brandon Ayuk is expected to be back this week off the COVID protocol list, because of that, those are going to be the two guys that get the volume. And with as much as they run the football, Jordan Reed, if you put him in, basically you hope for maybe 3 catches, around 40 yards, and you pray to God he gets in the end zone. So for this matchup, there's nobody here that I see as being fantasy viable this week. Again, as of this recording, Pittsburgh and Baltimore have not played this week yet. So if anything's happened with Eric Ebron, I can't speak to that nature because this video is being recorded before that game's being played. So to talk about this matchup for Washington, Logan Thomas will be a start for me. He's got at least 60 yards or a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games. And trust me, with the tight end position right now, if you get a touchdown from somebody, even if they don't get you 10 points, you don't care. You're thankful that you just got some points. For Eric Ebron in Pittsburgh, I'd like to start Eric Ebron against Washington, but again, it's hard to say that I'm going to start all 3 of these wide receivers and the tight end as well. And also, I don't know if James Conner is going to be back for this game yet next week or not. There was talk that he wasn't going to be able to make it, but because it's been pushed back to Monday, I am not sure if it falls within that 10-day period that he has to remain quarantined. I'm still looking into that. If James Conner were to be out, then I potentially start Eric Ebron as well, because then I don't see them running the football as much. As of right now, though, going to leave him as a sit because, yeah, he could hit on any given week, but again, it's really going to be a coin toss every single time. Again, just to reiterate, I don't know what's happened with Baltimore and Pittsburgh as of this matchup. So if anything happens to Mark Andrews, I don't know about this as I'm recording it. So we're just going to have to be patient if something happened to Mark Andrews. As of right now, definitely a start. He's been a lot better recently. Why? Because he's getting a ton of volume. We'll see what happens in that game with Robert Griffin III under center. Lamar Jackson, maybe he's back next week. But again, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll continue to monitor that throughout the week. But Andrews will be a start as of right now. And for Dalton Schultz, he'll be a sit. I'm just not trusting his usage right now. Yeah, he's getting a few looks here and there, but if you're watching the Dallas games, you're seeing that he's being used a lot more like underneath, and he's not really being looked at in the red zone nearly as much as we would like. If some of those things change as we get towards the end of the season, maybe we go back to him as a start, but as of right now, he's a sit for me. There you have it, Headliner Nation, my tight end start and sit analysis for Week 13. Hopefully you're able to get something out of it because the position is just a cluster, well, you know what right now. So do me a favor down below, hit that like button and leave a comment if you got any questions about any of the players I talked about. And as always, if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning into this episode. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliner.